Well, hello and welcome everybody to the Ecosystem Experience podcast. I'm Karen McKenzie, your host, and this is a great place for me to sit down with amazing people that I have met on my journey through ecosystems over many years and unpack what their experiences have been, what it's like to walk in the shoes, and what even ecosystem means for them. This is the very first one of these podcasts, and so I've got a script. I might stick to it, I might not. We will see how this goes. This is, as we say in the world of tech, a bit of an experiment. And on that note, I have a wonderful person who has put his hand up to be the guinea pig number one on the show with me, Dan Faulkner from Smart Bear. He's the CEO of Smart Bear. Dan, welcome to episode 1.
Thanks, Kieran. Happy to be here. Thrilled to be the first guest.
Excellent. I love the fact that you were so eager and willing to get on board and have a chat with us. And I'm really looking forward to working our way through this together. Hey, listen, for those who don't know, can you give us a little bit of an overview of Smart Bear? We sort of talk about it being this incredible, quiet giant in the background, connecting a lot of the tech, ensuring that developers are building great software. But really, what is Smart Bear?
Smart Bear is a company that's been around for more than 15 years now, and we provide many of the world's best-known tools around the domain of software quality. So it really falls into 3 buckets. API lifecycle management. So if any of your viewers and listeners have heard of Swagger or SOAP, that's us. And we've drawn those together into a platform called the API Hub. We do an incredible amount of application testing, functional testing, and test management. So you want to make sure your application works on all the endpoints that you care about and all the contexts that you care about. Then Smart Bear is a great place to come and visit for those kinds of tools. Mm-hmm. And we're also in the observability space. So if you want to watch your application running and figure out what happens when it crashes, and did that really matter, and is it performing well in production, then we have great products around that too.
So a huge focus really then on that quality of delivery across that spectrum of APIs, the testing, and then the monitoring side of things, which is a fantastic place to be. When you think about the term ecosystem, and we were just touching on this just before we started recording, you think about that term of ecosystem in the world of Smart Bear, what sorts of things come to mind for you?
There's 3 things that come to mind when I think about ecosystems that we care about deeply. In no particular order, there's sort of commercial ecosystems. So ways that we either distribute our software or partner with other companies and integrate into their products and technologies, or even into their GTM motions. And so for us, key ecosystem partners there would include Atlassian and Amazon. The second area is our open source ecosystem. So especially our API portfolio it's really an open core portfolio built on top of some of the world's blue chip open source assets. So Swagger, SOAP, Pact, Spectral, these are all assets that Smart Bear owns, and then we have commercial extensions of those that form our API hub. And those are absolutely gigantic communities, hundreds of thousands of downloads a week, and millions of downloads a year, millions of users worldwide. And then thirdly, of course, it's the ecosystem and community of our end users. We have a huge user community at Smart Bear that we engage with, and who, most importantly, who engage with each other. Over 130,000 like monthly active community members, and millions of interactions with them over the course of the year.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? We were sort of talking about it before, and I remember back to, this is going to date us both a little bit, but I sort of remember back to the 80s and the early 2000s when there was a real camaraderie around connectivity and ecosystems. You know, the early API channels was everybody just getting together and asking, hey, how did you solve, what happened here? Are you seeing a resurgence of that sort of ethos in your communities, of going back to that versus the more closed, no, I've worked out the secrets of AWS and I don't want to share those sort of mindset?
I think we're seeing it, and for a few reasons. Obviously, the open source community, that's always persisted. So that's been thriving. But you're right. Over time, I think there was this kind of there's always this slightly proprietary instinct of commercial companies to try and say, hey, you can all talk to each other within, just us, within our community. But one of the big changes I think that's happened is generative AI, this emergence of agentic tools has thrown open so many new possibilities that I think the world is kind of experimenting together and being very open about what they're trying, what's working, what's not working. And we chatted about this a little bit before we started as well. There's this change, I think, in how people are accessing customers. And if you want to be discovered by these answer engines that are driving so much of, top of the funnel activity for commercial companies right now, one of the things those answering engines are relying on heavily is communities. They'll pull from Reddit as one of their main sources, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a number of posts and articles. I mean, even Lenny the other day published a podcast on that shift to the answer engine optimization and how companies are doing it. And I think it's a reflection, when I think about it, that customers aren't looking for a product, they're looking for a solution. And so you're not searching for, how do I use something rather in, say, a Jira or something. You're actually looking for, how do I track something better? And the answer might be that you use a number of tools over a product, a Jira or a Notion or something else. But it's that, how do I unlock the value? And I think that's where community, right? And I was going to ask you, do you mine your community for stories? And I mean that in a positive way, not in a bad way. Do you go looking for those stories? Do you highlight those stories? Do they become part of your go-to-market motions of, this customer was able to achieve this outcome thanks to this number of things from our community or from our ecosystem?
We do. And I think there's even a shift there, though. So traditionally, that has been very much oriented around kind of a business outcome. So, they integrated product X or capability X into their environment, and they were able to achieve this huge business outcome or this huge acceleration. Or often, as is the case with us, like, their app was stable, it did what it was intended to do. It didn't have catastrophic failures. So those are obviously, the traditional type. Where I think we're going now is people are very much in a kind of, hey, let's build together. Let's look at workflows and new techniques we can discover together. And one of the things that's really unlocking that is the emergence of MCP. So being able to take underlying capabilities of those traditional tools and allowing agents to interact with those and creatively solve some of their own issues. And that is an area that I think is ripe for people to just be very open with each other and build communities around what they're discovering.
It's certainly a really fast-moving space, this whole interoperability, interconnectivity, the lowering of the barrier where, I mean, historically, you needed to be a developer to integrate with an API, or you needed to be someone who understood authentication models. Today, you need to be someone who can open a ChatGPT prompt and click the MCP button, right? And maybe put a URL or do a little search after, well, what's the URL to my MCP or something like that. Although a lot of them are already pre-baked in there, right?
Yeah.
And it's lowering that barrier. Smart Beer has built its credibility in its business around security and quality, as we touched on before. What are your thoughts in this space? Do you see Smart Beer having a part to play in that ecosystem of security and raising the bar and keeping that quality of integration and data protection high?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to be clear, we don't offer security solutions per se, but we are delivering quality solutions that need enterprise security. And I think that that's something that the market's going to have to experiment its way to and wrestle
Mhm.
with. So yes, we can make an MCP server available, um, but that still has to have enterprise grade um, security authentication. It's got to have all the encryption at data and at rest. Otherwise, no enterprise is going to actually deploy that within their ecosystem. They're going to immediately
Correct.
red team any MCP server that you make available to them. So in some respects, the technical threshold has declined, but I don't think the security or the quality thresholds can decline.
No, no, I agree. And I think that's where, yeah, you lower one bar, but you actually have to increase a different bar to
Yes.
balance things out a little bit. So you mentioned, okay, open source and community, and the other one was commercial. Now, congratulations, you just recently announced that you've done a strategic collaboration with AWS. Do you want
Yes.
to talk us through what does AWS and their ecosystem mean to you? And specifically, well, for those who don't know, what is a strategic collaboration and why was it important for SmartBear to do that with AWS?
We have had a growing partnership with AWS over the last several years. A lot of our cloud products run on AWS. Most of our cloud infrastructure runs on AWS. And over the years, we came to recognize that, initially their marketplace could be an interesting distribution mechanism for some of our tools. Us and every other vendor in the world came to
Yes.
that realization. And AWS has a very strong, very well structured, very clear um, sort of ladder of increasingly strategic relationships that you can establish with them. It's all kind of publicly available. And what it really entails is a set of um, mutual commitments. You need to be able to make sure that your product runs well in their environments, and there are certain quality criteria and mutual marketing commitments that you can make. And as you start to gain some success, um, transacting on their marketplace or even transacting through their marketplace, um, then you can start to have the next level of dialogue. And you get kind of escalating um, kind of gives and gets
Yeah.
as you go through those. And I think one thing that's really important is that it's a mutual commitment. And I'm sure that you've seen this in your experience, Kieran, and I'm sure Amazon sees this all the time. Is if a vendor goes into that kind of relationship thinking this is going to be great for us, and we're not willing to kind of make the commitment and the investment back, then it's probably not going to work. It needs to be something that as a vendor you're leaning into and investing in to try and make it work. And of course, it's a massive delta in scale and size, and you know what each company can put in. Um, but I actually think that makes it even more important that as a
Mm.
vendor, you've got to demonstrate not just an interest, but a commitment, some investment, and some results.
Yeah.
So that's what we've been doing. And so the strategic collaboration agreement that we announced is important to us because um, it enables us to work more closely with Amazon from a technical perspective and from a GTM perspective. Um, and it enables us to just have levels of discussions about how our technologies can fit into some of their broader solutions. Coming back to that word solutions again, that would have been much more difficult for us to do previously.
Yeah.
So it's a long term relationship, and not something that I think you should anticipate kind of has an immediate, you know, hockey
Yeah.
stick kind of effect. It's something that you commit to as an important part of your overall growth strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting. For those who don't know, before I was at Atlassian, I was at AWS leading the ISV side of the business for the APAC region and marketplace and this community, and actually doing and orchestrating these SCAs and working with people like SmartBear and others. And in fact, actually, my team were responsible for looking after SmartBear coming into the APAC market. Um, it's a fascinating place, and we spend a lot of time with partners really sense checking and correcting some of the preconceived ideas. And I liked what you sort of touched on there, that, as you were sort of saying, if you come into it thinking it's going to be immediate and thinking you're going to get a hockey stick take, you're not, right? And so you need to be able to work out how to cut through some of the noise and cut through some of the component parts. As you were coming into this, how did you and your team really do that? Did you end up building like sales plays or scripts or stories? How did you get alignment with those AWS teams?
It's a cross-functional, pretty long-term set of conversations where we, um, you know, as the vendor who's trying to get into the ecosystem, and position ourselves for mutual success with AWS, we may come in and say, well, look, here are our business priorities. Here are the things, here are the opportunities that we see. And then they're pressure tested.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's by the people who are in the room with you. They might just be saying, hey, that sounds nice. It's sweet that you want us to do that, but that's not how things work. Or other times it might be, okay, well, that's an interesting idea, but we need to now go and find the people within AWS who would be able to answer whether that's a viable idea or not. And of course, that's one of the critical things. It's such a large and complex organization that just being able to navigate it and find the right person, get their time and say, would you be interested in X, is invaluable to a company that's on the outside of that complex environment internally. So it's a lot of back and forth on those discussions, both from a GTM perspective and from a technical roadmap perspective.
It's interesting hearing you say that. And I reflect back to when we were there, and the partners that were successful were often the ones that I remember sitting with one of them, and they pulled up a spreadsheet or a document of some sort that they'd mapped out the internal relationships at AWS. They had a better understanding of the AWS business than I did in their particular swim lane. And I think that's what often makes the partnership successful. The ones who invest in finding those right people, building those relationships early, and sometimes that's as easy as just asking your partner manager to connect you to them and then sort of having a couple of meetings. Other times it's going to industry events or going to those security conferences or whatever it might be, or the quality conferences or developer conferences, connecting with the Atlassians there, building those relationships. The AWS folks there, so that you're building that. But you're right, it takes a concerted time and effort on your part to get the bang for the buck later when you're then saying, hey, I need support with this logo on this particular piece. This is the right person who's the expert, who's the trusted person in that space to go and have that conversation. So thinking then about the marketplace, because you touched on the importance of the AWS marketplace, it's huge. And we do know now that huge significant chunks of the SaaS sales market has moved into the marketplaces.
Mm-hmm.
How has this been for you? How do you, like in a noisy world of marketplace, how do you stand out? Is it actually a discovery place for you, or is it a transactional place? And how are you cutting through some of that noise?
Yeah, for us, we view it more as a place to do business rather than as a kind of a storefront. And I think that's realistic, just given that there are so many solutions on there. It's a very valuable resource for us to actually transact business on. It's something that we've been growing consistently over the last few years. The amount of business that we actually just transact on the marketplace is growing consistently. It's of course also the platform on which Amazon's sales organizations and GTM organizations are going to conduct their business and fulfill their business. And it's very, very important that we're there for them. It's literally like a prerequisite. So those are really, that's really the value that we're currently getting from it, rather than sort of saying, hey, we've got this flow of sort of self-service business that's thriving on the marketplace independently. And I don't think that's the same for all vendors by any means, but that's our experience.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. I think the tailoring of those things to the vendor, to the partner, to the relationships, to the type of audience you're selling to is absolutely critical. And just because that platform is available doesn't mean it's the right thing for every single nuance. Smart Bear is naturally aligned to a procurement person who's already buying AWS services, and so there is a really great connection there. One question I used to get quite a lot, and I'd love your thoughts on it, is around the differentiations that, so certifications and the different badges and the different programs you go through. What's Smart Bear's approach to that in the sense of participating in those things? One, to play in the ecosystem, but also to actually put a stamp of difference on your offering that makes sense to the Amazonian seller.
Um, I think it in terms of sort of if you sort of literally mean sort of a hey, we kind of check this box, we've got this particular sort of stamp on our marketplace site. Not that much, because we're having direct conversations ourselves. We're a pretty high velocity business, but we are still primarily a sales led business.
Right, right. Yeah.
So we don't need the kind of the iconography so much to see us through. But of course, it does enable us to have certain discussions with customers when we can kind of um, talk about solutions and how we can deliver them, how we can fulfill them through Amazon.
Yeah, it is interesting. Again, it goes back to that value that you're trying to deliver and helping to understand your positioning in the market, speak the same language as the Amazonian sellers, or speak the
Yeah,
same language as what the customers resonate with that makes sense to them, right? And I think a key part of what you just said there is, and I used to say this to people as well, is don't chase badges for badges' sake. Chase
right.
badges for what they mean for your customers, right? And if
Yeah,
and if a certification or something is important for the regulated industry you're going for, you absolutely need to have that. It's table stakes, but you don't necessarily have to have everything in order to play the
that's
game and
right.
play in the market. So moving on, you've become CEO of Smart Bear, which means leading people and coaching people. And I know from your background, you've been doing that for a while. I'd love your thoughts on how you coach product managers to have ecosystem thinking in their DNA.
It's not easy. It's because it's not intuitive to a lot of high tech
Mhm.
product managers. They're thinking about um, end customer value hard. They're thinking about competition and differentiation for the end user experience a lot. But of course, it goes back, you know, we're going to date ourselves again. That, people used to emphasize the 4 Ps. And, place, distribution is just incredibly important. And I think um, there's it's a really underestimated skill of product managers is that it's so easy to get obsessed with what you're building and what the end user experience will be. But if you haven't thought all the way through to how are people actually going to not just use this, where are they going to use this, but how are they going to buy it, how are they going to
Yeah.
become aware of it, who are all the people in the world who are going to be talking to prospects about this? Is it just going to be us? Is it just going to be our salespeople, our direct salespeople, or just our website? Or are we going to be able to get our way into um, broader distribution channels? Are we going to be able to combine our value proposition with partner value propositions so they can sell? We can actually be the differentiator for them in their competitive landscapes. And so that is something that, in my experience, typically needs to be explicitly raised. It's just not an intuitive skill for most product leaders that I've seen, and so it is something we have to, we make a point of when we're talking to our folks, and as you know, a decent chunk of our business is through ecosystem relationships.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we spent such a lot of time at Atlassian together because it's such an important part of your business and also the offering that we give to, or Atlassian was giving to customers in that world. So are you when you're taking on new product managers, are you deliberately coaching? Have you got programs in place? Have you built things, or are you pairing them up with people and walking the walk and showing them and having conversations in situ?
Yeah, we're trying to hire people who've got some experience.
Right.
That's generally what we're trying to do. Is it will be one of our key hiring criteria
Yeah.
for any of the products that are going into those ecosystems. But if there's somebody who's growing up, within our organization, because we obviously are looking to develop and hone the skills, then yeah, they will need to learn off somebody who's really got the skills. And just
Yeah.
to kind of emphasize that, I'm kind of casting my mind back to one of the more recent product management leadership hires we made. Um, the person coming into that role wasn't really a a software tools, developer tools, testing tools expert, but they were a marketplace and ecosystem expert.
Interesting.
And it was actually, we were saying we can ramp them up on the testing and the dev tool side of things. We're actually going to prioritize their ecosystem expertise for that particular role. That's how important it is.
Yeah, fascinating. I've got some upcoming conversations with people when I'm thinking about transfer of skills and skills coming in. Fascinating to hear you say that because yeah, that those conversations we have as recruiters when we are looking for people, you do have those. What are the non-negotiable things that I want this person to have coming in? And at different times, they could be different things, obviously.
Yes.
But it's interesting
Yes.
to hear you say in this particular scenario, the partnerships, the relationships, when, as you mentioned before, right, we often think ecosystems, or at times we can default into ecosystems being technical, so API or software stuff, but actually it's GTM. It is, how do you have a conversation with the customer? It is marketing, it is brand. There's so many sides of things around the outside of it. Having that ability to think 360 degrees is critically important. um, okay, so coming back to the CEO role, and you find yourself in this position of a commercial company that's growing, doing amazing things, and this huge portion of open source. The assumption is that open source is what it is, but we do know there are commercial layers over top of that. But I'd love to know, how do you balance the goodwill in that sort of space with the commercial realities of running a business and building ecosystems across that?
Um, so I think the first thing is to just be very clear about what role you're trying to play in the open source community. Um, and what I mean by that is, I think it's fine to own open source assets and say we're a commercial organization and we need to make money, and to be clear that you plan to, um, and then to make that crystal clear to the community about how you're going to go about that monetization. So for some open source communities, they will say, okay, uh, we're going to provide this technology, we're going to charge you for support. That's how they monetize the
Yeah.
community. Or they may say, we're going to provide this open source, and then we're going to have a, a, a version that's got bigger, better databases or enterprise layers of security, and you have to pay for that upgrade if you want to. In our instance, we're saying, here's this amazing set of tools that are open source that we keep thriving, and we keep secure, and we keep updating on a regular basis. And for people who want more, who want additional value or enterprise features, collaboration features, there's this commercial version that you can easily upgrade to. And so I think just being clear about
Yeah.
how you're going to monetize and how you're not, like what your philosophy is. And so we're very committed to our philosophy, um, to the extent that when we had an open source asset, we had a very well-known open source asset that we didn't feel we could fit into the model that worked for us, we returned it to the open source community. We donated it back to the open source community, because otherwise within a commercial organization, it would eventually atrophy, and that's not the right
Yeah.
thing to do for that community.
And I think that demonstrates your that desire to balance the right things. and
Yes.
chase the right things, and also know when to put your hand up or when to put that flag up and say, okay, enough's enough. This isn't the right thing for us. We're going to put it back into the right sort of space. And I reflect on that, and I think about, what makes a good ecosystem and those sort of things. The words trust and transparency come to mind. And you've mentioned transparency a number of times through this
Yep.
conversation. I think those two things are so critical in how both sides or all sides of that ecosystem equation connect to each other. There has to be a trust layer in there. There has to be transparency, and there has to be a commonality in the direction you're heading for. So, with that in mind, one of the last questions I had for you was around this world of there's a lot of competition and conflicting priorities often across ecosystems. It could be a vendor who has a particular priority that is conflicting to yours, or it might be that you're in two different ecosystems that have slightly different conflicting priorities, or there's competition across those. How are you balancing that? Do you see this competition across ecosystems in the world you're in, and are you balancing that side of things so that it works well for SmartBet?
Um, so if we can try and sort of exemplify that, do you mean sort of say a competitor to Amazon and they've got
Well, yeah,
competing
exactly. It
priorities?
could be that you are. So a couple of examples I was thinking through on this was, yeah, are you in both AWS and GCP? In which case, and I know a number of people do play in those sort of spaces where, there is the natural competitive nature between those two hyper cloud vendors. Or is it like what we were wrestling with at Atlassian, where Atlassian has a particular vision in a particular space, but it might be slightly different to what your objectives with the customers are. So you'll find yourself with different priorities or different focus to the vendor you're supplying to or partnering
Ah,
with.
gotcha. Yeah, both great points, different points.
Yeah, yeah.
With respect to the former, yes, we have some products that run in GCP. As I mentioned earlier, the majority of our SaaS applications run on AWS. We actually don't perceive a conflict there. As you mentioned, trust and transparency are incredibly important. We don't hide that from either vendor. We don't try and we actually um, it enables us in some instances to just meet the customer where they want to do business.
Mm-hmm.
And For the most part in our business, though, it's actually kind of an either or. We will be 100% on one vendor, so the conflict doesn't really exist. But in the small areas where it does exist, we're just very open. If we need to, we will be clear about internal rules of engagement, so that we can't be the source of conflict. With respect to your second point, where you may have an ecosystem partner whose strategy um, may not be what your ideal strategy would be, or they may be going in a slightly different direction, or at a different pace, or
Yep.
with different priorities. Um, that's inevitable.
Mm.
There is no getting around that kind of conflict. And in my opinion, that's where trust and transparency pays dividends, because you have to be
Correct.
able to talk to each other properly when those moments of conflict arise.
Mm.
And so a it's a natural part of business. It's a natural part of any long-term professional relationship. It's often conflict is a part of most long-term personal relationships as well.
True.
So you just need to be ready for it, not assume everything's going to be smooth sailing, and be able to have open channels of communication. And I think in all walks of life, there might be gives and gets. It might be saying, look,
Yeah.
be patient, because we actually think there's something that's really good coming around the corner if we can kind of get through this. Um, and even if you end up in a situation, um, which I haven't had at Smart Bear, but I have had in other partnerships in my career, where you say, look, this just isn't going to work. We're really in conflict here. We're starting to tread on each other's toes in a way that
Yeah.
isn't going to be practical for either of us to be able to operate successfully. Then just stepping away
Yeah. Yeah.
um, gracefully is the right thing to do. And what you've got to do is focus in those instances, which are regrettable and I think rare, But in those instances, you just need to focus on what's best for the customer,
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
joint
Always.
customer.
Yeah, I love that. Always make those decisions with the customer in mind. What's the right thing
Yep.
for the customer the way through? But yeah, you're right. Sometimes you do have to put the flag up and say, hey, this isn't working for us anymore. We've got differing versions of where our company's going or different priorities or whatever, and you work through those. Dan, fantastic conversation so far. Really loving it. I want to touch on one little thing before we go, maybe a bit of a delight or a surprise. In the ecosystem world, we often talk about those magical surprises when a customer or a partner or a user of our product puts it in a place, puts it or uses it in a way that we just had no idea that was coming. Have you got anything you could share where someone has completely surprised you with how they've used the tools that you've got in a way that just wasn't the intention?
We we discussed this question, and I don't have like an absolute magical story for you, because what we do is so specific that it's tough to actually kind of completely use it
Surprise
for
you think?
something. Like if you've got an API catalog and you're building tests off it and documenting it, it's really all you can do with it. I'll tell you the area that we've probably seen people do that the most is we've got test management is a big part of our business, and it's essentially a system of record with a great audit trail for who did what to it, and it stores all the artifacts, and it's got little kind of permissions and approvals chains if needed. And we have seen people really extend the use cases of that beyond what's intended, and that can create some interesting conversations with them when you say, hey, we've made some breaking changes and you need to upgrade to this new version, and they say, oh my god, we've got all these customizations that we need to deal with. But no, sadly, I think our stuff is so definitive and so deterministic. There's never been anything that's just totally blown us away.
Which in and of itself is actually a great testament to knowing your swim lane, building
Yeah.
for that target audience and staying
Yes.
there. So congratulations on that side of things. It's fantastic. Now, as we wrap up, in today's day and age, there are a million new tools, particularly AI ones right now, that are coming down the pipeline and things we're using. As Dan, the man, not necessarily the CEO, just you as a person, what's the one tool that you can't live without right now?
I don't think it will surprise you, but for me, it's ChatGPT. It's wildly, wildly useful. I use it all the time at work. I use it a huge amount outside of work. I find that with that and all the kind of the frontier models, the main limitation on what I can do with it is my own imagination. I think it's very difficult for most humans to fully comprehend the massive knowledge base that it has been trained on, and the incredible capabilities that it has, and so it's become really invaluable to me, professionally and personally.
Excellent. Dan, thank you so much for joining me on this very first episode. It's been a fantastic conversation with you. I've really enjoyed it.
It's my pleasure, Kieran. Great to be here.
Folks, that brings us to the end of episode number 1. I have some great people lined up to carry on these conversations in the coming weeks. Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Cheers!